Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading tonight from the Bhagavad-Gita as it is by His Very Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada. And we're reading chapter 8, Attaining the Supreme, and we're on text 27. Naite Shritapartha Janan Yoge Muyanti Kaschana Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Yoga Yukto Bhavarjuna Na Never Ete These two Shruti Different paths Partha O son of Pritha Janan Even if he knows Yogi, the devotee of the Lord. Muyati is bewildered. Kaschana, any. Tasmat, therefore. Sarveshu, Kaleshu, always. Yoga Yuktaha, engaged in Krishna consciousness. Baba, just become. Arjuna. O Arjuna. Translation. Although the devotees know these two paths, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered. Therefore, be always fixed in devotion. Purport. Krishna is here advising Arjuna that he should not be disturbed by the different paths the soul can take when leaving the material world. A devotee of the Supreme Lord should not worry whether he will depart by arrangement or by accident. The devotee should be firmly established in Krishna consciousness and chant Hare Krishna. He should know that concern over either of these two paths is troublesome. The best way to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness is to be always dovetailed in his service. And this will make one's path to the spiritual kingdom safe, certain, and direct. The word yoga, yukta, is especially significant in this verse. One who is firm in yoga is constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness in all his activities. Sri Rupa Goswami advises, Anasaktasha Visayan Yatarham Unjataha. One should be unattached in material affairs and do everything in Krishna consciousness. By this system, which is called Yukta Vairagya, one attains perfection. Therefore, the devotee is not disturbed by these descriptions, because he knows that his passage to the supreme abode is guaranteed by devotional service. So, Naiti Shriti Patarjana Yogi Muyati Kaschana Tasma Savishikalishu Yoga Yukto Bhavarjuna. Although the devotees know these two paths, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered. Therefore, be always fixed in devotion. So there are about 6 points that I picked out from this verse. And each one of the points, you can actually discuss them from so many angles and continue to talk about them. The first one is that Krishna advises Arjuna not to be stirred by the different paths the soul can take when leaving the material world, be it by accident or arrangement. So in the previous verses, Srila Prabhupada was talking about, actually Krishna and Srila Prabhupada was talking about how, you can pass away from the world. There are different ways. If you're a mystic and, if you're passing from world one in light and one in darkness. And so So Prabhupada's telling us that we shouldn't worry about it. As long as we're in Krishna consciousness, then our main focus should be just how to get attached to Krishna. We don't have to worry about how we're going to leave, in what way, and all these auspicious ways you're supposed to leave. And in our scriptures, there are probably others, but the one main person I can think about who was able to do that was Bhishma Dev. He got the boon after he took the vow of celibacy, not to have, any children. He got the boon that he was able to decide when he's going to leave, and at whatever the sun comes into a certain position. So he was able to make that decision, but also he was also able to wait for Krishna to appear before him before he left the body, and he got his wish fulfilled because Krishna came there. And after Bhishma Dev discussed the government, how to run the country with Yudhisthira, and then when Krishna was there, so Bhishma Dev fixed his eyes on Krishna and left at the appropriate time. But for us, we don't have to worry about that. As long as we keep our mind focused on Krishna. Because actually this attaining Supreme is telling us how we can get to the spiritual kingdom. And while I was also researching this, I was thinking about how what are the obstacles that we face, when we're trying to fix our mind on Krishna. And are we fixing our mind on Krishna 24 hours a day? And in this one, the devotee should be firmly established. So firmly, and he says it twice in this paragraph, this purport. He says, the devotee should be firmly established in Krishna consciousness and chant Hare Krishna. And he says, one who is firm in yoga is constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness. And he should be unattached in material affairs and do everything in Krishna consciousness. So the dictionary meaning of firm means not soft, not yielding, securely in position, and having determination or faith. And as I also was looking over the verses, Krishna is so kind, to increase our faith. Throughout this chapter, he says, in text 7, in the translation, all through he says, therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. Oh, there was a previous one too. In text 5, he also says, and whoever at the end of his life quits his body remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. Then in text 6, he says, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So Krishna is assuring us. He says it all throughout this particular, and I'm sure in other ones too, but in this particular chapter, he's telling us, that we should have faith. We shouldn't doubt what he's saying. If Krishna says this is what's going to happen, then we just need to do our part. And in text 8, he also says, he who meditates on me as the Supreme Person of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, O Partha, he is sure to reach me. And in text 10, he uses the term, he will certainly attain to the Supreme Person of Godhead. So all through this chapter, he uses the word in text 13, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. And in 14, he says, for one who always remembers me without deviation, I'm easy to obtain, O son of Pitta, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. So there were several things I thought of when I was reading this, is the importance of having faith. But I also thought, in terms of the instance of Mother Yashoda, who was We have to put forth the effort, And she was trying to tie him. We all know the story of Damodar, when she was trying to tie him up and she was sweating and she was going through so much anxiety and it was out of love. I was trying to discipline him and tie him up, but she couldn't do it, And then he saw that she was putting so much determination and so much effort into trying to show her love to him by tying him up. Then let me let her tie me up so I can keep her out of anxiety, when he saw the amount of love that she had for him. So this is what we're trying to develop. That's why we're, in this process. We want to develop love for Krishna. And also we want to understand the spiritual world, because we won't desire to go there unless we know the beauty of the spiritual world, what it's like, to go there. And so also, it says the best way to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness is always be dovetailed in his service, thus making one's path to the spiritual kingdom safe, certain, and direct. So in that way, he's saying, don't worry about the other processes, of how you leave, when you leave, the way you're going to go. Doesn't matter how you lose your body. Just know that as long as you are sincerely engaged in his service, then, as he says, safe, certain, and direct. And so also, I wanted to talk about one other point about this fact that Krishna is assuring us through this whole chapter in all the examples that I gave about without a doubt, without fail, is actually it's the only relationship that we can be secure about, because everything else is temporary. So we're always looking for security. We want to be out of anxiety. And we're looking for it in this world for somebody to make us feel secure, to have acceptance, to have security in the relationship, to have love, to be safe. But actually, because everything is temporary, the only shelter we have is Krishna. He's the only one we can take shelter of and be assured of our security, be assured of his love, and be accepted, and which is our natural position anyway. We are part and parcel of him, so he's definitely there for us, wanting us to come back home, to be with him. He's always wondering why we are just riding away in this material world, as Prabhupada says. So another question that arose in my mind, which I'm also dealing with, is the mind, how to control the mind and keep it dovetailed, and thinking always of Krishna 24/7. Because whenever any difficulty comes, right away we start, at least I do, focusing on the difficulty and not focusing on Krishna. Like go through our mind, okay, how can this be? How can I solve this? It just somehow seems to play over in the mind. But the mind needs to take shelter of Krishna. Actually, I was reading, what was it? Facebook is good for some things, not a lot of things, because it's a time stealer. Satyananda Swami put something about why when we have problems, we try to, figure it out ourselves. The first thing we do is like, oh, how can I deal with this problem? How can I get out of it? Instead of going through all of that, go to Krishna first. I remember Prabhupada said something about if you have a problem, you should just go and stand in front of either Gaura Nitai or Krishna Balaram and say, dear sirs, I have this problem, and pray about whatever the problem is. In the last class I gave, I also talked about prayer, because for me, I really need the mercy. So for me, I think the praying, even though we're chanting, we can see throughout our whole Vaishnava history, the Gaudiya history, that everyone was praying. In fact, the Srimad Bhagavatam is full of prayers. It's mostly prayers. Everybody's praying. The demigods pray. Everybody's praying. Even we know the pastimes of Srila Prabhupada, who saw him praying when he was at the Rupa Goswami Samadhi, and he was crying and he was sweeping the floor, but he was crying, he was praying. And when he reached America, he was praying, my dear Lord, how can I make them understand, what I'm bringing? So the prayer is very important. And there are so many prayers throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam that we don't have to, even create our own. We can go to those prayers that resonate with us and take the prayer and make it our own and pray. And my personal experience has been that when you pray, the Lord responds. There's a response from the Lord, when you pray. It might not be the response you're expecting or that you want, but he definitely answers the prayers, and it's always for your good, for your best, in your best interest, how he answers your prayer. So back to this issue about the mind, because there's so many obstacles we can run into, and one of my obstacles is the mind, keeping the mind focused on the chanting, on thinking of Krishna 24/7. And I realize when there's a gap in devotional service, it makes a playground for the mind. The mind starts going here and there and all over the place instead of coming back to the source, thinking of Krishna all the time. And then also we can look at what is the quality of our practice. How are we practicing? Are we focused? Do we fall asleep at japa, or do we talk at japa, or do we think of problems while we're doing japa? So the mind can present a lot of difficulties. I can read, and when you look in the index of the Bhagavad-Gita, at the end there's a long index regarding the mind, because the mind is one of the major culprits. The mind concocts something. I know it's been everyone's experience, if you've been in Krishna consciousness long enough, or even not, before then, the mind thinks of something it wants to do or needs or concocts, but then you find out that you may get that thing, or a thing may happen, but it wasn't as you expected. In fact, it was a lot less than you wanted or expected, and it was something you didn't want, because the mind is just making up things. It's just concocting, things that it wants to do, or things that, it needs, or desires. All these desires come up. So I want to read this one. It's 634, about the mind. And there's another text I would like to read, too, about how the mind is. We can either make the mind our friend, or it can be our worst enemy, and the mind can also degrade us. And the verse that talks about how the mind, Arjuna says that the mind is restless and hard to control and turbulent. Like the wind, and you cannot capture the wind. It just goes through your fingers. You cannot do anything with it, isn't it? Okay, so 634. It says, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati balavad dritham tashaham nigraham manye vayor eva suduskaram. This is the one. For the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna. And to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind. And he says in the purport that the mind is so strong and obstinate that it sometimes overcomes the intelligence, although the mind is supposed to be subservient to the intelligence. So he's saying the individual is the passenger in the car of the material body, and intelligence is the driver. Mind is the driving instrument, and the senses are the horses. The self is thus the enjoyer or sufferer in the association of the mind and senses. So it is understood by great thinkers. Intelligence is supposed to direct the mind, but the mind is so strong and obstinate that it often overcomes even one's own intelligence, as an acute infection may surpass the efficacy of medicine. Such a strong mind is supposed to be controlled by the practice of yoga, but such practice is never practical for a worldly person like Arjuna. And what can we say of modern man? The simile used here is appropriate. One cannot capture the blowing wind. And it is even more difficult to capture the turbulent mind. And the easiest way to control the mind is suggested by Lord Chaitanya's chanting Hare Krishna, the great mantra for deliverance in all humility. So it means in all humility. And that humility also involves, there are prayers that you can say before you start your japa, before you start chanting. And we should become beggars. We should beg the Lord for his mercy before we chant, because we can't depend on our own strength to subdue the mind. We have to get help from the Lord. So we should, before we chant our japa, we should pray to the Lord strongly and beg him, please help me direct my attention towards you so that I can chant with attention, with humility, actually really desiring to overcome the obstinate mind which wants to wander here and there. And I was reading in the Bhagavad-Gita, 1632, where he's saying the mind's object of perception is thoughts and feelings. And also that the moon god is the controlling deity of the mind. Everything, every element, all the senses in our body are controlled by a deity. So one solution is that we should give up all desires for sense gratification, Okay, so I'll move on to some of the other points. I'll repeat again. One who is firm in yoga is constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness, and that we should be unattached in material affairs and do everything in Krishna consciousness. And by this system, which is called Yukta Vairagya, one attains perfection. So even if we have to work outside, if we have, we have a job, or I forget what chapter it's in, but Krishna says, all that you do, whatever you do, should be offered to Krishna. So even if we have to work a job, we can see that as an offering to Krishna, and that will help us use everything in Krishna's service, which he said is that's the system. It's called Yukta Vairagya. Whatever the microphone, whatever material thing we need to use, it should always be dovetailed into the service of Krishna. That way we can remember Krishna 24/7. Even our families, they all belong to Krishna. So when we, have a wife or a husband or children, we all are moving in the same direction towards being servants of Krishna and helping us all to go back home, back to Godhead. This whole process is for us to know how to leave the body. And if we're, like, not totally focused on Krishna and thinking of Krishna 24/7, how can we train our mind to remember Krishna at the last test, the biggest test that we're all going to face? Whether we're young or old, it doesn't matter. We're all headed the same way. Actually, I compare it to, like, when a woman gives birth, when she gets pregnant, the outcome has to be the pain. She has to have the child. It's a done deed. So she has to have the child. She has to go through the pain. So it's like us. We took birth. We came here. So the natural process is going to be, we have to leave, and we have to go through that process of leaving. And I was also listening to my Guru Maharaj today, and he was saying how sometimes when other people who are not actually in devotional service hear the devotees talk about death, they think that we're morose. But we're not being morose. It's a beautiful process. I call it, it's a charmed life, actually, to be able to come and see Krishna. Every day he's so beautiful. You come to Mongol Artik, and there's so many flowers, and you get to do so much service. You have garlands to make this. It's such a beautiful process. But still, that whole process is to direct our path, to leave, and to join Krishna in the spiritual world. So when we read, the reason we're reading all about Krishna, his pastimes and his naughtiness and his family and the spiritual world, and how everything's decorated with jewels and precious stones and the roads, you read all of that, it's to attract our minds to want to go back home, so that when it's time to leave, we're not depressed, we're not lamenting. Although we miss the association of those devotees who have already left, but still, that process should be a joyful process. And also, as I was listening to my Guru Maharaj, he was talking about his mother, who was telling her family, I don't want any lamentation, I don't want crying, I don't want black being worn at the funeral. I want you to give me my flowers now, not after I leave, because the soul will be going on, and she didn't want them hanging over her coffin, crying and lamenting, and she said that it's a festival that the person is going back home to Godhead. So we can, as we, try to stop the offenses and all the other difficulties that come, that's why we have spiritual masters. We can talk to them about our difficulties, and they can answer our questions and our doubts, and stay focused on going back home and not coming back here again, because actually it's a miserable place. We know it. It's a very miserable place. The body's miserable. You have so many difficulties. If you're young, maybe you don't have problems, but as you get older, you start getting problems. You can tell. It's like a car. It starts breaking down, and it's the normal process. It's time. Time breaks down all, and Krishna is time. Also for us, Krishna is death. And so when we think of death, we think Krishna. He's in charge. He's the one who's going to, And actually, one thing that also encourages me is I had a godbrother who had a heart problem, and he was in the hospital waiting for a heart transplant. But he wasn't sure he was going to make it. So my Guru Maharaj came to see him and told him, don't worry about anything. I'll be there in the transition if you have to go. So that's an encouragement. That's an encouragement. Don't worry about it. It's just changing dresses. It's the transition from this to something else. Even, so we shouldn't be morose. And we should actually keep that in the front. That, yes, actually, I remember I was in the kitchen cooking for Krishna, and I was thinking, Krishna, if I go back to the spiritual world, will I be able to cook for you? Will I have, all the things I need, like I do now, to make your sweets or to make whatever? What's going to be my service there? So we need to keep it in front, keep it in front of us that, yes, I have to leave this. So let me do the necessary. Let me try to focus. And sometimes, actually, it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult when your mind is, like, disturbed about anything. And also, to the extent that we're absorbing the mantra, I used to say that if something happens to you, that, if somebody scares you or you have an accident or something, what do you say first? Do you say, "Oh, Krishna," or do you say, "Ah"? Because sometimes that happens. It happened to me. I had a little incident when I was in Nepal. And it's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. I was walking on the road, and I saw a dog laying on the ground. And I just thought, okay, because the dog's here. They're like, but the dog jumped up and bit me. He just jumped up and grabbed hold of my arm. Unfortunately, I didn't say Krishna. And I was like, okay, problem. But then I got an encouragement. When I was coming back to Vrindavan, leaving Delhi, the taxi, I was a little bit dozing, and the taxi almost hit the car in front. But even though my eyes was closed, when the car got ready to hit the other car, I woke up and said, "Krishna!" So I said, okay, a little balance there. Maybe something's happening, because Prabhupada used to compare it to like a parrot. The parrot can say, "Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna." You can teach him to say Hare Krishna, but when something comes, he says, "Ah!" Like a parrot. That's what I'm saying. Because that's his conditioning, He didn't say Hare Krishna, he said, "Ah." The parrot sounds, So, but we should all be encouraged because we have the association of like-minded devotees. We have the Sangha of the devotees. We have the holy name. We have the temple. We have Sri Vrindavan Dham. Even though I can't see the Dham, I'm here in Vrindavan, but I can't say I see the Dham. But my Guru Maharaj's mercy, I'm here, So we should all be encouraged and try to examine ourselves to see where are we, to be honest, to say, I have this problem, I have this anartha, because sometimes we don't want to, due to false ego, we don't want to say that I have a problem, I have this issue, I have this conditioning, because it seems here in Vrindavan, you can see your anarthas better. They're coming to you faster and quicker, and you can see them. And so it'll benefit us to examine, to self-examine and see, okay, I really need to work on this. It's ugly. I don't like it, and I don't want to have it. So Krishna, can you please help me get rid of it? Can you help purify me? So once you admit the problem, then you can get the help. But if you don't admit the problem, it means you want to hold on to it without examining, because the false ego is wanting to keep that false conception of yourself. And you have to be small in order to grow. You have to see yourself as being small in order to grow. One more incident I'll relate. This was in a long time, well, in the 2001 or 2000, about 2001, 2000, my father was sick and he had to go into the hospital. My father was a military man, and he always had, he was in charge. He was a sergeant, he was a captain of platoon, so he was always in charge of something. And I always saw him as bigger than life, because we were very close. But then when he got sick, he got cancer of the stomach. And I was at Gita Nagar at the time, so I went and stayed in Baltimore to go see him, to be with him in the hospital. So I missed a couple of visits. So then I went once, and then I went back again maybe a week later because I had to do my service. And I went into the room, and I came back out. I saw someone in the bed, but I came back out, and I asked the nurse, "Where's my father?" And she said, in the room I was in, "That's my father." But when I went in, I could feel, it seems he had shrunk somehow, not only in body, but he was dealing with the fact that he had to leave, you know. So he had gotten very small because, you know, when you're living this life, you think you're in charge. And then you find out you're not even in charge of your body. You know, you're not even in charge of your body. So there was a mood in the room that I could see that he was grappling with the fact that he's diminishing. You know, so this was a lesson for me to see, you know. But fortunate for him, he had done so much service at Gita Nagari. He had come for the deity installation. He had done a lot of service. So he's taken care of. You know, I don't know what body he gets. It'll be a human body. At least he had a lot of prasadam. So the encouragement is we have a wonderful process, and we just need to be real and deal with whatever's coming up and be happy in the service and in chanting. So I'll stop now. If there's any additions, any questions, any criticisms, any comments, whatever, I welcome them. And if anybody wants to speak, please get the mic, because Mother Parvati is always reminding us about, get that mic. Anybody? No exchanges?
What is the actual devotional service?
I'm sorry?
What is the actual devotional service?
Devotional service is whatever you do for Krishna is devotional service. Whatever is offered to Krishna is devotional service. Krishna is the focus. That becomes devotional service. Mm-hmm.
Chanting, hearing,
Hearing, yes, it's all devotional service.
we offer some thing on the power of
Anything you offer,
devotional service.
yes, that's devotional service. Whatever we can offer to Krishna. Krishna is so kind. If you do the smallest thing, he's so happy. Look, he says, look, my devotee is offering me one little flower, one little fruit. He says in the Gita, just offer me a leaf, a flower, or fruit. I think it's in chapter 9. Just offer me a leaf, a flower. I will accept. He's so kind. One more thing before we close is, you see how Krishna is so kind, because look at Putana. Putana was trying to kill him, actually. She put poison on her breast and was trying to feed it to Krishna. But still, because in a previous life she had seen Vamana Dev, and she was so attracted by him and wanted to be his mother. And then she changed. And I think it was because he had taken everything away from Bali, I'm not sure. But still, he gave her service in the spiritual world as a mother. So if someone's, you know, if we're trying to come to him, no matter what the struggle, and we offer him a little something, then he accepts. Any other questions? Is that okay? Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay. Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada for bringing us this beautiful process. Hare Krishna.